The dust of the trail clung to Hannah Reynolds's parched lips as she stumbled forward, one hand braced against her swollen belly, the other clutching a tattered photograph of Thomas, her husband, of barely a year before the fever took him. The unforgiving New Mexico sun beat down on her bonnet-covered head as black spots danced before her eyes. Her knees buckled, and the vast, empty landscape of 1875 spun around her before she collapsed into the dirt of the westward trail, her consciousness fading as hoofbeats approached from the distance. Virgil Montgomery pulled his horse to an abrupt halt when he spotted the woman's form crumpled on the trail ahead. He'd seen his share of death in his 30 years, first in the war, then in the wildlands between settlements, but the sight of a lone woman, heavy with child, lying abandoned on the dusty path, still managed to squeeze his heart with unexpected force. He dismounted in one fluid motion, dust billowing around his worn leather boots as he approached her. Kneeling beside her still form, he saw the gentle rise and fall of her chest, still alive, thank God. When he gently turned her onto her back, he noted her swollen belly beneath the threadbare dress. "Madam," he said, tapping her cheek. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing hazel eyes clouded with exhaustion and fear. She tried to speak, but only a dry rasp emerged. "You ain't dying on my watch," Virgil declared, already reaching for his canteen. "Not you, and not your little one." Hannah's parched lips parted as this stranger, this rugged man with kind eyes and a voice like gravel over velvet, dribbled water between them. The blessed wetness revived her enough to whisper, "My baby." "Both of you are going to be fine," he assured her, though the hard set of his jaw betrayed his concern. He glanced around at the empty trail stretching in both directions. "Where's your people? Your wagon?" A single tear cut through the dust on her cheek. Gone. All gone. Virgil didn't press for details. The story was written in the shadows beneath her eyes and the worn wedding band on her finger. Instead, he gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his weathered appearance. "Name's Virgil Montgomery. I've got a place about 2 hours' ride from here. Not much, but it's shelter and there's food." He settled her onto his horse with care before mounting behind her. "Can you hold on just a little longer?" Hannah leaned back against his solid chest, too weak to do anything but nod. As his arm came around to secure her and his horse began to move, she closed her eyes and surrendered to the strange mercy of this unexpected guardian. The journey to Virgil's homestead passed in a haze for Hannah. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes startled awake by the baby's movements, other times by the gentle pressure of Virgil's arm, steadying her when she swayed. "Just a little farther now," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as the terrain began to change. The barren trail gave way to greener land, a creek running alongside their path, and finally a modest cabin with smoke curling from its chimney came into view. A small Mexican woman emerged from the doorway, her weathered face creasing with concern as Virgil approached with Hannah. "Dios mío," she exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "What have you found, Virgil?" "This is Socorro, my housekeeper," Virgil explained to Hannah as he carefully dismounted, keeping one hand on her to ensure she didn't fall. "Socorro, this lady needs help. She's with child and has been alone on the trail." Socorro crossed herself. "Bring her inside, quickly." The cabin's interior was simple but unexpectedly comfortable, a far cry from the rough bachelor quarters Hannah had imagined. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a sturdy table with chairs occupied the center, and various rugs softened the wooden floor. Virgil carried Hannah to a door at the back of the main room, which opened into a small bedroom. "This is yours for now," he said, lowering her gently onto a bed covered with a handmade quilt. "I cannot," Hannah began to protest weakly. "You can and you will," Virgil cut her off. "Socorro will help you get comfortable." As he turned to leave, Hannah caught his sleeve. "Why are you doing this?" Virgil paused, his expression unreadable. "Because my mother raised me better than to leave a woman and her unborn child to die in the dust." Without further explanation, he stepped out, closing the door behind him. Socorro clucked her tongue as she helped Hannah out of her filthy traveling clothes and into a clean nightgown that must have belonged to someone else. It was far too fine for a housekeeper. "Whose room is this?" Hannah asked, sinking into the softness of the bed with a sigh of relief. "It was Mrs. Montgomery's," Socorro replied as she brushed Hannah's tangled hair. "Virgil's mother. She passed 2 winters ago." "And Mr. Montgomery?" "His father?" "Gone many years now. Killed by Comanches when Virgil was just 15. Socorro poured a cup of water from a pitcher on the bedside table. "Drink, Senora. Then rest. We will talk more when you are stronger." Hannah wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion pulled her under, and she surrendered to sleep, one hand protectively covering her swollen belly. Virgil sat at his kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Socorro bustled around, preparing a broth for their unexpected guest. "She is very young," Socorro observed. "And very pregnant," Virgil added, running a hand through his hair. "What was she doing out there alone, Socorro? Who leaves a woman in her condition to fend for herself?" "Death leaves us all, Virgil," Socorro replied softly. "You of all people should know this," Virgil grunted, unwilling to acknowledge the truth of her words or the memories they stirred. "How long until she can travel? Sweetheart isn't far. I can take her there once she's rested." Socorro gave him a penetrating look. "You would send her away so quickly? A woman about to give birth." "What would you have me do? I'm hardly equipped to deliver babies," he said, discomfort evident in his tone. "Besides, she'll be better off with her own kind, other women, a doctor." "And if the child comes before she can travel?" Virgil drained his cup in one gulp, grimacing at the cold, bitter liquid. "Then I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." But as he stepped outside to tend to his horse, Virgil found himself looking back at the cabin, at the window of the room where the woman now slept. Hannah. She'd finally told them her name as he carried her inside. Hannah Reynolds, widow of Thomas Reynolds, dead of fever 6 months past. The rest of her story remained untold, but Virgil had a feeling it was one of heartache and desperate hope, the kind that drove a woman to risk everything for a fresh start. He wasn't looking for complications in his life. He'd cultivated his solitude carefully after returning from the war, building this place far enough from town to avoid constant interaction, but close enough to sell his horses and cattle when necessary. Socorro was company enough, with her no-nonsense attitude and respect for his silences. But now there was Hannah, with her haunted eyes and the child growing inside her, a woman who needed more than he was prepared to give. "Just until she's strong enough to travel," he muttered to himself as he unsaddled his horse. "That's all." Hannah woke to golden afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the morning came rushing back, her collapse on the trail, the cowboy who'd saved her, the safe haven of this strange bedroom. She pushed herself up against the pillows, one hand automatically going to her belly. The baby kicked vigorously, as if reassuring her, and she smiled despite everything. A soft knock at the door preceded Socorro's entrance. The older woman carried a tray with a steaming bowl of broth and fresh bread. "Ah, you are awake. Good. You must eat to keep up your strength," she said, setting the tray on Hannah's lap. The savory aroma made Hannah's stomach growl. She hadn't had a proper meal in days, subsisting on hard biscuits and jerky as she walked the trail. "Thank you," she said, taking a spoonful of the rich broth. "This is wonderful." Socorro nodded approvingly. "When was the last time you ate a real meal, Nina?" Hannah considered. 3 days ago, perhaps. I traded my last coins for supplies in a small settlement, but they didn't last as long as I'd hoped. "And where were you heading, all alone in your condition?" "California," Hannah replied, tearing off a piece of bread. "My cousin lives in Sacramento. She wrote after Thomas died, offering me a place to stay until the baby comes." "Sacramento is very far," Socorro observed. "And you were walking?" Hannah's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I had a mule, but it was stolen 2 nights ago while I slept. I thought I could reach the next town before my strength gave out." She looked down at her swollen belly. "I miscalculated." "It is fortunate that Virgil found you when he did." "Yes," Hannah agreed softly. Is Mr. Montgomery always so kind to strangers? Socorro's expression softened. Virgil has a good heart, though he tries to hide it beneath that rough exterior. The war left its marks on him, as it did on many men. Hannah finished her soup in thoughtful silence. She had seen those same haunted looks in Thomas's eyes when he spoke of his time in the Confederate Army. Those ghosts had followed him to their marriage bed, waking him with night terrors that only her gentle touch could soothe. "Does Mr. Montgomery have a family?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "No wife, no children," Socorro replied. "There was a girl once, before the war, but," she shrugged expressively, "she did not wait. Now he keeps to himself, raises his horses, and avoids town except when necessary." The bedroom door opened again, and Virgil himself stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable at finding them in conversation. "I see you're awake," he said to Hannah. "Feeling any better?" "Much, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Mr. Montgomery, I don't know how to repay your kindness, but—" "Virgil," he corrected, "and there's no need for repayment. Any decent man would have done the same." But Hannah knew better. In her desperate journey west, she had encountered plenty of decent men who had turned a blind eye to her plight, unwilling to burden themselves with a pregnant widow. "Nevertheless, I'm grateful," she said, "and I won't impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary. If you could direct me to the nearest town with a stagecoach connection, I can continue my journey as soon as I'm able." Virgil frowned. "The nearest town is Sweetheart, about 15 miles south. But in your condition—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable discussing her pregnancy. "What Virgil means," Socorro interjected, "is that you should not travel until after the baby comes. It would be too dangerous." Hannah's hand tightened on her spoon. "But I can't possibly stay here that long." "You can and you will," Virgil interrupted, echoing his words from earlier. "I won't have it on my conscience if something happens to you or your child because I sent you away too soon." Their eyes locked in silent battle, his resolute, hers desperate and proud. 2 weeks, she finally conceded. "If the baby hasn't come by then, I'll leave for Sweetheart and find a place to stay until it does." Virgil nodded, accepting the compromise, though the set of his jaw suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied. "Fine. 2 weeks. Now get some rest. Socorro and I have chores to finish before sundown." As they left, Hannah sank back against the pillows, torn between relief at having shelter and uneasiness at being so dependent on a stranger's charity. But as the baby kicked against her palm, she reminded herself that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her child's welfare had to come first. Outside, Virgil strode toward the barn, his movements betraying his agitation. Socorro hurried to catch up with him. "You know she cannot travel, even in 2 weeks," she scolded. "The baby will come before then." "Then she'll stay until it does," Virgil replied shortly. "But I won't keep her here against her will, Socorro. She's not a prisoner." "No, but she is a stubborn woman," Socorro observed, "like someone else I know." Virgil snorted but didn't argue the point. Instead, he changed the subject. "She'll need baby things, and more suitable clothes. Hers are hardly more than rags." "I can make do with what we have," Socorro assured him. "Your mother's trunks still have some dresses that might be altered." "Good. And tomorrow I'll ride into town for supplies." He hesitated. "And maybe see if Doc Wilson can spare some time to ride out and check on her." Socorro hid a smile. For all his protests about sending Hannah away as soon as possible, Virgil was already making plans for her extended stay. The older woman had lived long enough to recognize the beginnings of something significant, even if Virgil himself remained oblivious. "That would be wise," she agreed mildly. "Now, go finish with the horses while I prepare dinner. Our guest will need more substantial food if she is to regain her strength." The next few days established a routine of sorts. Hannah insisted on getting out of bed, despite Socorro's protests, and made herself useful with small tasks around the cabin. She helped prepare meals, mended clothing, and even attempted to teach Socorro how to make the apple dumplings that had been Thomas's favorite. Virgil kept his distance, spending most of his time with his horses or working his small herd of cattle. But Hannah often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. On the third morning, Dr. Wilson arrived from Sweetheart. He was younger than Hannah had expected, barely older than her own 23 years, with spectacles and a gentle manner that put her at ease. "Everything appears normal, Mrs. Reynolds," he pronounced after examining her. "The baby is well positioned and strong. I'd estimate you have perhaps 3 weeks before delivery, though first babies often come late." "Thank you, doctor," Hannah replied, smoothing her borrowed dress over her belly. "And please call me Hannah." "Hannah, then," he smiled. "I'm Howard, and I must say, you're fortunate that Virgil found you when he did. Traveling alone in your condition was extremely risky." "I had little choice," she said softly. "After Thomas died, there was nothing left for me in Tennessee. His family blamed me for his death, claimed I didn't care for him properly during his illness." Dr. Wilson's expression darkened. "That's absurd. No one can prevent fever once it takes hold." "They were looking for someone to blame," Hannah explained, twisting her wedding ring. "And I was an easy target, the outsider who stole their son away. When I discovered I was with child, I knew I had to leave before they could try to take my baby from me." The doctor squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Well, you're safe now. Virgil may be rough around the edges, but he's a good man. One of the best I know, in fact. You've known him long?" "Since the war. We served together different regiments, but we ended up in the same field hospital after Gettysburg. I was a medical assistant then, not yet qualified. Virgil had taken a bullet to the shoulder, and another had grazed his head." Dr. Wilson smiled faintly at the memory. "He was the worst patient I ever treated, stubborn, impatient, convinced he needed to get back to his men." Hannah tried to reconcile this image with the reserved, solitary man who had saved her life. "He doesn't seem like a man who forms attachments easily." "The war changed him," Dr. Wilson said simply. "It changed all of us. But underneath it all, he's still Virgil, loyal to a fault and unable to turn his back on someone in need." Their conversation was interrupted by Virgil himself, knocking briefly before entering with a wooden crate in his arms. "Socorro said the examination was finished," he explained, looking everywhere but at Hannah. "I brought some things from town that might be useful." Hannah watched in amazement as he unpacked the crate baby blankets, tiny clothes, a packet of special tea for new mothers that the shopkeeper had recommended, and even a small wooden cradle. "Mr. Montgomery, Virgil, this is too much," she protested, fingering the soft flannel of a baby gown. "I can't accept all this." "Consider it a loan," he replied gruffly. "You can return it all when you continue your journey." But they both knew most of these items would never be returned. They were gifts, though neither of them could acknowledge that truth aloud. "How is she, Doc?" Virgil asked, changing the subject. "Healthy considering what she's been through," Dr. Wilson replied. "But I've advised against travel until after the birth. Even then, she should wait at least 2 weeks before attempting the journey to California." Virgil nodded, unsurprised. "She's welcome to stay as long as necessary." Hannah opened her mouth to protest again, but something in Virgil's expression stopped her. Behind his mask of indifference, she glimpsed genuine concern and perhaps something more, something that made her heart beat a little faster. "Thank you," she said instead, "for everything." After the doctor left, promising to return in a week to check on her progress, Hannah found herself alone with Virgil for the first time since her arrival. The silence between them vibrated with unspoken words. "You didn't have to do all this," she finally said, gesturing to the baby supplies. Virgil shrugged, his discomfort evident. "Socorro gave me a list. I just followed instructions." Still, it was thoughtful. She hesitated, then added, "Dr. Wilson told me you served together in the war." His expression closed off immediately. "Howard talks too much. He admires you greatly," Hannah persisted. "Says you were heroes together." "There were no heroes in that war, Mrs. Reynolds," Virgil said flatly. "Just men doing what they had to do to survive." "Hannah," she corrected gently. If I'm to call you Virgil, you should use my given name. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or reluctant amusement crossed his face. Hannah, then, she smiled, sensing a small victory in this minor concession. Were you raised here? On this ranch? Virgil moved to the window, gazing out at the landscape he knew so intimately. Born and raised. My father started with just 20 acres and 5 horses. By the time I left for the war, we had 300 acres and one of the finest breeding programs in the territory. And now? Now I have what you see 100 acres, 30 horses, about 50 head of cattle, enough to keep me busy and fed. He turned back to face her. What about you? Where were you raised? Hannah settled more comfortably in her chair, one hand absently stroking her belly. Ohio. My father was a schoolteacher, my mother a seamstress. They died within months of each other when I was 17, influenza. I went to live with my aunt in Tennessee after that. That's where I met Thomas. He was a good man? Virgil asked, then immediately looked as if he regretted the question. Forgive me, that's none of my business. He was, Hannah assured him, gentle, hard-working. He had plans to move us west even before he fell ill, said there were opportunities here that Tennessee couldn't offer. Her voice caught. He would have been so excited about the baby. Virgil crossed the room in 2 strides and awkwardly patted her shoulder, clearly uncomfortable with her emotion but unwilling to ignore it. I'm sure he would have been. Hannah wiped away a tear, embarrassed by her display. I'm sorry. You've been nothing but kind, and here I am weeping all over your floor. Cry all you need to, Virgil said gruffly. God knows you've earned the right. Their eyes met, and something indefinable passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared loss despite their different paths. Then Socorro called from the kitchen that dinner was ready, breaking the moment. As they moved toward the table, Hannah felt the baby give a particularly strong kick. Without thinking, she grabbed Virgil's hand and pressed it to her belly. Feel that? She whispered, delighting in the wonder that transformed his rugged features as the baby kicked against his palm. That's life, Virgil. Despite everything, that's life going on. He didn't pull his hand away immediately, and when he finally did, his touch lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. Yes, he agreed softly. Life goes on. The days that followed saw a gradual thawing in Virgil's reserve. Though he still spent most of his daylight hours working with his horses, he began joining Hannah on the porch in the evenings, where they would sit in companionable silence or engage in conversations that grew increasingly personal. Hannah learned that Virgil had been engaged before the war to a girl named Eliza, who had married a store clerk while Virgil lay wounded in a field hospital. She told him about her dreams of opening a small school once she was settled in California, teaching children the love of learning that her father had instilled in her. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Hannah sat mending one of Virgil's shirts while he whittled a small wooden horse. Socorro had already retired for the night, and the only sounds were the creaking of Hannah's rocking chair and the soft scrape of Virgil's knife against wood. Why didn't you ever marry? Hannah asked suddenly. After Eliza, I mean. Virgil's hand stilled. Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or perhaps you never looked, she suggested gently. He gave her a sharp glance. What makes you say that? Just an observation. You've built a life that doesn't seem to have room for others. This ranch is remote. You rarely go to town, she shrugged. It feels deliberate. Virgil resumed his whittling, but his movements were less fluid, betraying his tension. Maybe it is. The war taught me that attachments are dangerous. People leave or die or change. So do you, Hannah pointed out. We all change. That's what living means. Is that what you're doing in California? Changing? There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. Hannah considered the question. I'm trying to build a life for my child. I'm not sure if that's changing or just continuing. Thomas and I had plans. Now I have to make new ones. Alone. Yes, she agreed, though the word felt heavier than it had before her time in this cabin. Alone, but not without hope. Virgil set down his carving and knife, then handed her the small wooden horse he'd completed. "For the baby," he said, "every child should have a toy." Hannah took the exquisitely crafted figure, running her finger over its smooth contours. "It's beautiful, Virgil. Thank you." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. Hannah felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby, and when she looked up, Virgil's eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and unspoken feelings. Then a log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks, and the spell was broken. Virgil withdrew his hand and stood. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rough. "You should rest." Hannah nodded, suddenly unsure of what had just transpired between them. "Good night, Virgil." "Good night, Hannah," he replied, and the gentleness with which he spoke her name lingered in the air long after he had gone. That night, Hannah dreamed of Thomas for the first time since arriving at the Montgomery ranch. In the dream, he stood at the end of a long path, smiling at her with love and something else permission, perhaps. When she woke, tears streaked her face, but her heart felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the rhythmic movements of her child. "Your father was a good man," she whispered, "and he would want us to be happy wherever we found ourselves." The realization that she was, indeed, finding happiness in this unexpected place, with these unexpected people, struck her with the force of revelation. She had come to rely on Socorro's motherly concern, to look forward to Virgil's quiet companionship, to feel at home in this simple cabin, far from anywhere she had ever planned to be. But what did that mean for her future, for her plans to continue to California? And what of Virgil, who had saved her life, but maintained such careful distance despite the growing connection between them? These questions followed Hannah throughout the next day as she helped Socorro preserve peaches from the small orchard behind the house. The repetitive work of peeling and slicing gave her time to ponder her situation, though it brought her no closer to answers. "You are troubled, Nina," Socorro observed as they worked side by side at the kitchen table. "Is it the baby?" Hannah shook her head. "No, the baby is fine. I'm confused about what happens next." "Ah," Socorro nodded wisely. "You're thinking of California, yes? And perhaps of reasons to stay?" Hannah's hands stilled, a half-peeled peach-dripping juice onto the table. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to these old eyes that have seen many hearts dance around each other," Socorro replied with a gentle smile. "Virgil cares for you, more than he himself understands, I think." "And I care for him," Hannah admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. "But it's so soon after Thomas, and I'm in such a vulnerable position. How can I trust my feelings? How can I ask Virgil to take on another man's widow and child?" Socorro covered Hannah's sticky hand with her own. "The heart knows no calendar, Nina. And as for taking you on, Virgil has been alone too long. He needs someone to remind him that life is for living, not just surviving." Before Hannah could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching at speed. Virgil had left at dawn to check on a mare about to foal, but this sounded like multiple riders. Socorro moved to the window, her expression darkening. "Trouble," she muttered. Hannah rose awkwardly, her advanced pregnancy making quick movements difficult. "What is it?" "The Blackburn brothers," Socorro spat. "Worthless bandits who prey on isolated homesteads. They have tried to intimidate Virgil before, demanding protection money." Fear clutched at Hannah's heart. "What do we do?" Socorro moved with surprising swiftness for her age, retrieving a shotgun from above the fireplace. "We show them that the women of this house are not helpless." The riders, 3 rough-looking men, dismounted in the yard. The largest, a bearded giant with a jagged scar across one cheek, pounded on the door. "Montgomery," he bellowed, "time to have our talk about business arrangements." Socorro handed the shotgun to Hannah. "You know how to use this?" "Thomas taught me," Hannah confirmed, though her hands trembled slightly as she took the weapon. "Good. Stay inside. I will speak to them first." Socorro, no. But the older woman had already opened the door, standing defiantly in the threshold. Mr. Montgomery is not here. You can leave your message with me." The bearded man laughed unpleasantly. "Look here, boys, the Mexican housekeeper thinks she can send us away?" He leaned down, his face inches from Socorro's. "Step aside, woman. We'll wait for Montgomery inside." "You will wait for him in town or on the road or in hell for all I care," Socorro replied evenly. "But not in this house." One of the other men, younger but with the same mean eyes as the leader, drew his pistol. "Maybe we should teach the old woman some manners, Jeb." "Maybe we should," the bearded man Jeb agreed, reaching for Socorro's arm. Hannah moved into view then, the shotgun steady in her hands despite her fear. "I wouldn't," she warned, her voice calmer than she felt. "This scattergun doesn't care if it hits one of you or all three." The men froze, clearly surprised by the appearance of a heavily pregnant woman with a shotgun. "Well, well," Jeb recovered first, his eyes raking over Hannah's swollen form. "Montgomery's been busy, I see. Didn't know he had a woman." "There's a lot you don't know," Hannah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady, "including how close you are to getting your heads blown off your shoulders. Now get back on your horses and leave." The third man, who had remained silent until now, tugged at Jeb's sleeve. "Come on, Jeb. We can come back when Montgomery's here." "Listen to your friend," Socorro advised, "or the next rider down this road will be the undertaker." For a tense moment, Hannah thought Jeb would call their bluff. Her finger tightened imperceptibly on the trigger, her heart thundering in her chest. Then, with a curse, Jeb stepped back. "This ain't over," he growled. "Tell Montgomery we'll be seeing him real soon." The men mounted their horses and rode away, dust billowing in their wake. Only when they were out of sight did Hannah lower the shotgun, her arms suddenly leaden with relief. "You were very brave, Nina," Socorro said, closing and bolting the door. "But now you should sit. Such excitement is not good for the baby." Hannah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "Who are they? What do they want with Virgil?" "The Blackburns fancy themselves outlaws, but they are just bullies," Socorro explained, pouring Hannah a glass of water. "They demand money from isolated ranchers, threatening to burn barns or steal cattle if they aren't paid. Virgil has refused them twice now." "And they'll come back?" Socorro nodded grimly. "They will. But next time, Virgil will be ready." As if summoned by his name, they heard a single horse approaching. Socorro peeked out the window and relaxed. It is him. Virgil entered moments later, immediately sensing the tension in the room. His eyes fell on the shotgun still resting across Hannah's lap. "What happened?" he demanded. Socorro explained about the Blackburn brothers' visit and Hannah's intervention. Virgil's face darkened with each word, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I'm sorry you had to face that," he said finally, looking at Hannah with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you all right?" "Just a bit shaken," she admitted. "They seemed dangerous." "They are," Virgil confirmed, "but not as dangerous as they think. I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak to the sheriff. It's time someone put a stop to their intimidation." "You will be careful," Socorro ordered rather than asked. "Hannah and the baby need you to return safely." Something passed over Virgil's face at her words. Surprise followed by a softening that transformed his features. "I will," he promised, his eyes fixed on Hannah. "You have my word." That evening, after Socorro had retired, Hannah found Virgil in the barn, checking his pistol by lamplight. She stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to confront them because of me," she said softly. Virgil looked up, his expression determined. "Not just because of you, because it's the right thing to do. Those men have been terrorizing ranchers and homesteaders across 3 counties. It's time someone stood up to them." "But why does it have to be you?" Hannah moved closer, drawn by the quiet intensity of his focus. "You've done so much already, saved me, given me shelter, prepared for my baby. Why take on this fight too?" Virgil set the gun down and turned to face her fully. "Because that's who I am, Hannah. I can't turn away from what needs doing, even when it would be easier. He hesitated, then added, "It's why I stopped for you on that trail. Why I brought you here instead of just taking you to town. Some things you just know are your responsibility." "And I'm your responsibility?" Hannah asked, her heart beating faster at his closeness, at the way his eyes traced her face as if memorizing its contours. "You became mine the moment I found you," Virgil acknowledged, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Though I fought against it." "And now?" Hannah hardly dared breathe as she waited for his answer. "Now I can't imagine it any other way," he admitted, the confession seeming to surprise him as much as it did her. "But you have plans, Hannah. California, your cousin, the school you want to open. I have no right to ask you to change those plans." Hannah reached for his hand, her fingers twining with his. "What if I told you my plans could change, that perhaps they already have?" The hope that flared in Virgil's eyes made her breath catch, but before he could respond, she gasped, doubling over as a sharp pain seized her abdomen. "Hannah!" Alarm replaced every other emotion on Virgil's face. "What is it?" "The baby," she managed between clenched teeth. I think it's coming." Virgil didn't hesitate. He swept Hannah into his arms and carried her back to the house, calling for Socorro. The older woman was already up, as if she had been expecting this summons. "Put her in the bedroom," Socorro directed. "Then ride for Dr. Wilson, quickly." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Hannah. Virgil returned with the doctor just as her labor intensified, then retreated to pace the porch, while Dr. Wilson and Socorro attended the birth. The sound of Hannah's cries tortured him, each one driving him further into a state of helpless anxiety. Inside, Hannah fought through the pain, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Thomas," she gasped at one point, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. "He is with you in spirit," Socorro assured her, wiping sweat from her brow. "And we are with you in body. You are not alone, Hannah." Those words became her anchor as the labor progressed, reminding her that while one chapter of her life had ended, another was beginning, one filled with unexpected allies, and perhaps even new love. Finally, as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, the lusty cry of a newborn filled the cabin. Hannah collapsed against the pillows, exhausted but triumphant, as Dr. Wilson placed a tiny, red-faced bundle on her chest. "You have a daughter," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy daughter." Hannah gazed down at her child, overwhelmed by love and wonder. The baby had Thomas's chin and her own wide-set eyes, a perfect blend of them both. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Socorro slipped from the room to share the news with Virgil, who had worn a path in the porch boards with his pacing. At her announcement, he sagged against the railing, relief evident in every line of his body. "She's all right? Both of them?" "Both thriving," Socorro confirmed. "Hannah has named the baby Eliza Hope Reynolds." Virgil's head snapped up at the name, understanding its significance immediately. Eliza for the woman he had once loved and lost, hope for the future that stretched before them all. Would it be appropriate for me to see them?" he asked hesitantly. Socorro smiled. "I think Hannah would be very disappointed if you did not." He entered the bedroom with the reverence of a man stepping into a sacred space. Hannah lay propped against pillows, her hair damp from exertion, but her face radiant as she gazed at the infant nursing at her breast. She looked up as Virgil approached, her smile widening. "Meet Eliza," she said softly. "Your goddaughter, if you'll accept the honor." Virgil knelt beside the bed, overwhelmed by the trust implicit in her words. "I'd be honored," he managed, his voice gruff with emotion. "She's beautiful, Hannah, just like her mother." The baby finished nursing and gave a tiny yawn that melted Virgil's heart. Hannah carefully shifted, offering him the swaddled infant. "Would you like to hold her?" With infinite care, Virgil cradled the newborn in his arms, marveling at how tiny and perfect she was. Eliza's eyes fluttered open, seeming to focus on his face, and in that moment, Virgil Montgomery, lone survivor, reluctant hero, solitary rancher, felt the last of his defenses crumble. "Hello, little Eliza," he murmured. "I'm so glad you're here." When he looked up, Hannah was watching him with tears in her eyes. "So am I," she said, and they both knew she meant far more than just the birth of her daughter. In the days that followed, Virgil surprised everyone with his natural affinity for the baby. He built a proper cradle, placing it near Hannah's bed so she could reach Eliza easily during the night. He patiently walked the colicky infant when she fussed, his large hands gentle as they patted her tiny back. He even fashioned a sling that allowed Hannah to carry Eliza while keeping her hands free. The Blackburn brothers were apprehended by the sheriff the day after Eliza's birth, caught in the act of attempting to rob a stagecoach. The danger they had posed evaporated, but the protective instincts they had awakened in Virgil remained, now focused entirely on Hannah and her daughter. 2 weeks after Eliza's birth, Hannah sat on the porch watching Virgil work with a young colt in the corral. The spring day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers, birds singing in the cottonwood trees that lined the creek. Socorro joined her, bringing a cup of herbal tea. "The little one sleeps?" she asked. "Finally," Hannah confirmed with a smile. "She fought it, but exhaustion won in the end." They sat in companionable silence, watching Virgil's skilled handling of the spirited colt. Hannah couldn't help but admire the confident set of his shoulders, the patient way he guided the young horse through its paces. "You know he loves you," Socorro said suddenly. "And the child, too." Hannah nodded. "I know. And you? What is in your heart, Nina?" "Love," Hannah admitted, the word both simple and profound. "I didn't expect it, didn't seek it, but there it is all the same." "Then why do I still see doubt in your eyes?" Hannah sighed, trying to articulate feelings she had only begun to understand herself. "Thomas was my first love. I thought he would be my only love. Discovering that my heart has room for Virgil feels complicated, like I'm being disloyal somehow." "Ah," Socorro nodded in understanding. "And do you think Thomas would want you to be alone? To deny Eliza a father who loves her as his own?" "No," Hannah said without hesitation. "Thomas would want us to be happy, to be secure." "And are you happy here?" Hannah looked around at the ranch that had become home in such a short time, at the garden where Socorro had taught her to plant herbs, at the barn where Virgil had shown her how to milk the cow, at the creek where they had walked together, talking of dreams and possibilities. "Yes," she realized, "I am." "Then perhaps California can wait," Socorro suggested gently. "Or perhaps it need not be part of your journey at all." Virgil finished with the colt and approached the porch, his face lighting up at the sight of Hannah. That simple, unguarded reaction decided her. "Virgil," she called, "would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to discuss." He nodded, offering his hand to help her from her chair. They strolled toward the creek, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows before them. "You're healing well," Virgil observed. "Dr. Wilson says you're making remarkable progress." "I feel stronger every day," Hannah agreed. "Which means I need to make some decisions about the future." Virgil's stride faltered almost imperceptibly. "Of course. You've mentioned writing to your cousin about your delay. If you'd like, I can arrange passage for you and Eliza on next month's stagecoach to—" "Virgil," Hannah interrupted, stopping to face him directly. "I don't want to go to California." Hope and confusion warred in his expression. "You don't?" "No," she took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to stay here. With you. If you'll have us." For a long moment, Virgil stood motionless, as if afraid any movement might shatter this moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he took her hands in his. "Hannah Reynolds," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "From the moment I found you on that trail, something inside me knew my life had changed forever. I didn't want to admit it, didn't want to risk my heart again, but loving you and Eliza isn't a choice anymore. It's as necessary as breathing." Tears filled Hannah's eyes. "Is that a yes?" Virgil laughed, the sound full of joy and wonder. "It's more than a yes. It's a promise to love you both, to protect you, to build a life with you for as long as you'll have me." "That sounds an awful lot like a proposal, Mr. Montgomery," Hannah teased, her heart overflowing. "I suppose it does, Mrs. Reynolds," Virgil replied, suddenly serious. "And while I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, I want you to know that when you're ready, I'll be here with a proper proposal and a ring worthy of you." Hannah reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I don't need time, Virgil. I know my heart, and it belongs with you." He leaned down, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. "May I?" In answer, Hannah closed the distance between them, sealing their declarations with a kiss that spoke of second chances and new beginnings. Virgil's arms encircled her, strong and secure, as natural as if they had been made to hold her. When they finally parted, Virgil rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find love again, especially not with a stubborn, brave woman who collapsed on my trail." Hannah smiled. "And I never thought my salvation would come in the form of a gruff cowboy who refused to let me die on his watch." "Best decision I ever made," Virgil murmured, kissing her again with a tenderness that melted her heart. They returned to the house, hand in hand, where Socorro waited with Eliza. The older woman took one look at their glowing faces and nodded in satisfaction. "It is about time," she declared. "Now I can plan a proper wedding." Virgil laughed, taking Eliza from Socorro's arms and cradling her against his chest. The baby gazed up at him with complete trust, tiny fingers curling around his thumb. "What do you say, little one?" he asked softly. "Would you mind if I became your pa?" In response, Eliza gave what Hannah swore was her first real smile. 3 months later, Hannah stood before a mirror in what was now their bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress that Socorro had helped her alter from one of Virgil's mother's gowns. Eliza, growing plumper and more alert by the day, watched from her cradle, occasionally cooing or waving her chubby fists. A knock at the door preceded Socorro's entrance. The older woman carried a small bouquet of wildflowers in a blue ribbon. "Something borrowed, something blue," she explained, handing them to Hannah. "The flowers are from Virgil's garden. The ribbon was mine on my own wedding day, many years ago." "Thank you," Hannah said, deeply touched by the gesture. "For everything, Socorro. For welcoming me, for helping with Eliza, for being the family I needed when I had none." "Ah, Nina," Socorro embraced her carefully, mindful of crushing the flowers. "You became family the moment Virgil carried you through that door. Today just makes it official in the eyes of God and man." Another knock, and Dr. Wilson peered in. "It's time," he announced with a smile. "Virgil's about to wear a hole in the church floor with his pacing." Hannah laughed, picturing her soon-to-be husband in his unaccustomed suit, nervously awaiting her arrival. We can't have that." Dr. Wilson offered his arm. "I'd be honored to escort you, Hannah." "And I'd be honored to be escorted," she replied, taking his arm. Socorro picked up Eliza, who was dressed in a gown made from the same material as Hannah's dress, and followed them out. The small church in Sweetheart was filled to capacity not just with the handful of friends Virgil had made over the years, but with townsfolk curious about the woman who had captured the heart of the reclusive rancher. But Hannah saw none of them as she walked down the aisle. She saw only Virgil, standing tall and proud at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, the journey that had begun with her collapse on a dusty trail seemed to come full circle. "You look beautiful," Virgil whispered as the minister began the ceremony. "You don't look so bad yourself," she whispered back, earning a smile that warmed her to her toes. They spoke their vows with clear voices and full hearts, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Virgil's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. At the small reception held at the town's only hotel, Dr. Wilson raised a toast to the newlyweds. "To Virgil and Hannah Montgomery, whose love story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope can find us sometimes in the most unexpected places and in the most unexpected ways." To Virgil and Hannah, the guests echoed, raising their glasses. Hannah leaned against her husband's side, Eliza sleeping peacefully in her arms, and knew that she had found more than just survival on that dusty trail. She had found her future, her home, her heart's true destination. Later, as they drove the wagon back to their ranch under a canopy of stars, Virgil placed his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Happy, Mrs. Montgomery?" he asked. Deliriously, she confirmed, resting her head against him. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he admitted. "When I rode out that morning and found you on the trail, I had no idea I was riding toward everything I never knew I wanted." "You saved my life that day," Hannah said softly. "And not just mine, but Eliza's too." Virgil's arm tightened around her. "And you saved mine, though I didn't realize it needed saving." As the wagon approached their home now, truly and legally, Hannah spotted Socorro on the porch, a lantern in her hand to welcome them. Eliza stirred against her chest as if sensing they had arrived. "Look, little one," Hannah murmured, "we're home." And in that moment, with her daughter in her arms and her husband at her side, Hannah knew that the journey that had begun in loss and desperation had led her exactly where she was meant to be, to this land, to this man, to this life that stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. 3 years later, Hannah stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Virgil taught Eliza to ride her first pony. The little girl's laughter rang out across the yard, her dark curls bouncing as she bounced in the tiny saddle. "Mama, look at me," she called, waving excitedly. "I see you, sweetheart," Hannah replied, waving back. "You're doing wonderfully." Beside her, Socorro rocked the cradle where Thomas Montgomery, just 6 months old, slept peacefully. The boy had his father's strong features and his mother's gentle disposition, a perfect addition to their growing family. "He will be as good with horses as his father and sister," Socorro predicted, smiling down at the sleeping infant. "God help us," Hannah laughed. "One horse mad child is enough." The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Virgil's breeding program had expanded, with buyers coming from as far as Kansas City for his stock. Hannah had opened a small school in one of the outbuildings, teaching the children of neighboring ranchers 3 days a week. Life wasn't always easy. There had been drought years, hard winters, the influenza that had nearly taken Socorro, but they faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land they had made their own, Virgil lifted Eliza from her pony and carried her toward the house, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck in complete trust and adoration. "I think someone's ready for dinner," he announced, setting their daughter on her feet. "She rode like a true Montgomery today." "Of course she did," Hannah smiled, reaching up to brush a smudge of dirt from Eliza's cheek. "She has the best teacher." Eliza beamed up at her father. "Papa says I can help with the new foals when they come." "Did he now?" Hannah raised an eyebrow at Virgil, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Only if Mama agrees," he amended, shooting Hannah a look that still, after all these years, made her heart skip a beat. "We'll discuss it," she promised Eliza. "Now go wash up for dinner." As Eliza scampered inside with Socorro following more slowly with the baby, Virgil pulled Hannah into his arms. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Montgomery?" he murmured against her hair. "You might have mentioned it," she teased, tilting her face up for his kiss, "but I never tire of hearing it." "I love you," he said simply, "more with each passing day." Hannah looked past him to the trail that led to their property, the trail where, years ago, she had collapsed in despair, certain that her journey was ending. Instead, it had only been beginning. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "if someone had told me that day on the trail that I would find not just shelter but a home, not just safety but love, I wouldn't have believed them. And if someone had told me that stopping for a collapsed widow would change my entire life," Virgil replied, "I might have ridden a different way." Hannah swatted his arm playfully. "You would not." "No," he agreed, his expression serious now. "I wouldn't have. Some things are meant to be, Hannah. Some trails are meant to be followed, no matter how unexpected the destination. As they turned to enter their home, where their children waited and their future unfolded with each passing day, Hannah silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought her to that lonely stretch of trail at exactly the moment when Virgil Montgomery was riding by. For in finding each other, they had both found what they needed most, not just survival, but life in all its fullness, with all its joys and sorrows shared between hearts that had learned to hope again. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and their ranch flourished, they never forgot how their story began with a desperate woman collapsed on a dusty trail and a determined cowboy who refused to let her die on his watch. It was not the beginning either of them had planned, but it was the one that had led them home.